I was driving late in November heading toward Knoxville, and I decided to take a quieter route instead of staying on the main highways the entire way. I had made this drive before, but this time I chose to cut through Cherokee and then continue through the forest toward Gatlinburg. I told myself it would be peaceful, maybe even relaxing. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps in slowly, and the sky had already gone dark in that heavy, wintry way that makes everything feel more isolated. The road was empty, and at first I didn't think much of it. Late-night drives are usually like that, especially once you leave town. As I passed through Cherokee, the streets were calm and mostly deserted. A few lights were still on in buildings, but there wasn't much movement. Once I left town and entered the forested area, everything changed in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't sudden, like a jump scare, but more like a slow tightening in my chest. The trees closed in on both sides of the road, tall and dark, their branches stretching overhead. The headlights of my car carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness, and beyond that tunnel was nothing but black. Not long after entering the forest, I started to feel like I was being watched. It wasn't based on anything I could see or hear. There were no footsteps, no shadows moving between the trees, no sounds other than the hum of my engine and the tires against the pavement. It was just a feeling, deep and uncomfortable, like when you realize someone is staring at you before you actually see them. I tried to brush it off and told myself it was just anxiety. I'd been driving for a while, it was late, and being alone in the woods can play tricks on your mind. To calm myself down, I pulled out my phone and started recording a voice message to a friend. I knew there was no signal out there, but talking helped distract me. I joked a little about how creepy the road felt, and how my imagination was probably getting the best of me. I remember laughing at myself, trying to make it sound like no big deal, even though my hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. When I finished the message, I put my phone back down and focused on the road ahead. Less than a minute later, something happened that made my stomach drop. As my headlights swept over the road ahead, I saw a solid white shape step out from the trees on the right side of the road. At first, my brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't aggressive. It moved slowly, calmly, like it wasn't in any hurry at all. The shape walked across the road in front of my car, clear and unmistakable, and then disappeared into the woods on the other side, moving upward along the slope of the mountain. What scared me the most was how human it looked. It wasn't hunched over or crawling. It didn't have long arms dragging on the ground, or glowing eyes, or anything like that. It was upright, with proportions that looked completely normal for a person. Head, shoulders, arms, legs, all in the right places. From the distance I was at, it looked like a person made entirely of white. Not glowing, not transparent, just white. There was no sound when it crossed the road, no footsteps, no rustling leaves. It was there, and then it was gone. I didn't slam on the brakes, and I didn't swerve. I don't even remember making a conscious decision about what to do. My body just went stiff, and my foot stayed steady on the gas. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my ears. I kept driving, eyes locked on the road ahead, half expecting something else to step out in front of me at any second. But nothing did. The road remained empty, stretching out in front of me like a dark ribbon. For the next 45 minutes or more, I didn't see another car. No headlights coming toward me, no taillights ahead of me, nothing. The forest felt endless, and the feeling of being watched never went away. If anything, it got worse. Every curve in the road made me tense up. Every shadow at the edge of my headlights felt like it could move at any moment. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, trying to explain it away. I thought about animals first. Maybe it was a deer, but I've seen plenty of deer and they don't look like that. They don't move like that. They also don't vanish silently up the side of a mountain without making any noise. I considered that it could have been a person, but that made even less sense. Who would be walking alone in the woods that late at night, wearing something so white it stood out against the darkness? And how did they move so quietly? I also thought about my headlights and the possibility of some kind of visual trick. Maybe fog, maybe light reflecting off something in a strange way. But the air was clear and the shape had definition. It wasn't a blur or a flash. It took steps. It crossed the road the same way a person would. I knew what I saw, and that knowledge made my skin crawl. By the time I finally reached an area with more traffic and lights, my nerves were completely shot. I didn't stop driving until I reached my destination. Even then, I sat in the car for a few minutes before getting out, just breathing and trying to calm myself down. The rest of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white figure stepping out of the trees. A few days later, I was talking to a local about the drive. I mentioned, half-jokingly, that I'd seen something strange in the woods near Knoxville. I didn't go into much detail at first because I didn't want to sound crazy, but as soon as I described the white humanoid crossing the road, his expression changed. He stopped smiling and got very serious. He told me I wasn't the first person to report something like that. According to him, some locals refer to it as white hair. He said people have been seeing it for years, mostly while driving alone at night through wooded areas. He didn't offer a clear explanation, and he didn't seem eager to talk about it for long. What stuck with me was how casually he accepted it, like it was just another strange thing you learn to live with when you grow up in that area. I asked him if it was supposed to be hairy, since the name suggested that, but he shrugged and said descriptions vary. Some people say it looks fuzzy or indistinct. Others say it looks smooth and solid. That matched my experience. What I saw didn't look hairy at all. It wasn't skin and bones either. It didn't remind me of any creature from folklore that I knew, at least not clearly. It was just there. Even now, thinking back on it, I still don't know what to make of that night. I've driven through forests and rural areas plenty of times before and since, but I've never felt the same kind of fear I felt on that road. It wasn't panic, exactly. It was deeper than that, like a sense that I was somewhere I wasn't meant to be, witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. I still have the voice message on my phone, recorded just before it happened. Listening to it gives me chills. You can hear the nervous laughter in my voice, the way I try to convince myself that everything is fine. Knowing what came next makes it feel eerie, like a warning I didn't understand at the time. I don't tell this story to scare people, and I don't claim to know what I saw. All I know is that it felt real, and it stayed with me in a way few experiences ever have. Whenever someone mentions driving through that area late at night, I think about that white figure and the long, empty road, and I hope I never see anything like it again. But even now, years later, it remains one of the most disturbing and surreal moments of my life. It is the kind of memory that doesn't fade. It doesn't soften with time. It just sits quietly in the back of your mind and waits for the right moment to remind you how fragile life can be. A few years ago, on an early weekday morning, I was walking to my bus stop like I had done hundreds of times before. It was around 5 in the morning, that strange hour where night hasn't fully let go yet, but morning hasn't quite arrived. The sky was dark, covered in a thin mist that made everything look slightly unreal, like the world was holding its breath. The streetlights cast weak yellow circles on the pavement, and everything outside those circles disappeared into shadow. I was half awake, half asleep, moving on pure routine. I remember eating a banana as I walked, mostly because it was easy and quick. My mind was busy with something completely unimportant. I was debating whether I wanted to stop at Starbucks before getting on the bus, or wait until after my commute. It felt like a big decision at the time, even though it really wasn't. That's how normal the morning felt. That's how safe I believed I was. The street was quiet. No cars passed. No one else was walking. The mist softened every sound, making my footsteps feel louder than they should have been. I was approaching a dimly lit corner on my street, a place I had passed countless times without thinking twice. There was an alleyway on the left side, narrow and dark, barely visible unless you knew it was there. As I got closer, a tall man stepped out of that alley. At first, my tired brain didn't fully register what I was seeing. He seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if the darkness itself had pushed him forward. He was wearing a black mask that covered his face, and his clothes blended into the shadows around him. Because I was sleepy and disoriented, I barely acknowledged him at first. My brain tried to file him away as just another early commuter, even though nothing about him made sense. Then he shouted, "Put down your fucking purse." The sound of his voice cut through the quiet like a knife. It was sharp, angry, and loud in a way that didn't belong in that still morning. When I looked up, truly looked at him, I saw the gun in his hand, pointed directly at my head. That was the moment everything clicked. The fog in my mind vanished instantly, replaced by pure fear. Time slowed down in a strange way. I remember noticing small details that felt completely ridiculous given the situation. The mist clinging to my jacket, the cold air in my lungs, the sticky feeling on my fingers from the banana I had been eating. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst out of my chest. He told me again to put down my bags. I don't remember exactly how my voice sounded, but I remember talking quickly, nervously, trying to sound calm even though I wasn't. I told him I was putting my things down, that I was doing what he asked. I placed my bags on the ground, careful not to make any sudden movements. Then he ordered me to walk toward him, toward the alleyway. "Get down on the fucking ground," he said. I agreed out loud, even though every part of me was screaming that this was wrong. I told him I was coming. I told him I was listening. My heart was racing so fast that it felt unreal, like my body had entered some kind of emergency mode. I knew deep down that I needed to get away. I just didn't know how. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I couldn't stop talking. Words kept spilling out of my mouth, even though I knew they might make things worse. I tried to explain that I was on the ground, that my stuff was already there, that he could just take it and leave. I begged him, not loudly, but desperately. He didn't like that. He screamed at me to shut up, his voice full of rage. Then he moved quickly, closing the distance between us in seconds. He got on top of me and pressed the gun to my head. I could feel the weight of him, the pressure of the weapon, the cold reality of how close I was to dying. My entire body went rigid. In that moment, I thought about everything and nothing at the same time. I realized then how quiet the street was. This was a normally busy area, even early in the morning. But now there was no one. No cars, no pedestrians. It felt like the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us frozen in that moment. It's important to mention how I was dressed that day. I was on my way to coach a high school practice, and my clothes were loose and baggy. Big pants, a jacket, a hat pulled low. From a distance, I probably looked like a teenage boy, or at least someone younger and smaller than I really was. If it weren't for my voice, I could have passed for a kid from the 1990s dressed in oversized streetwear. And as he was on top of me, gun to my head, he looked at me more closely. He paused. I can't explain how I knew this, but I knew something changed in his mind. It was like a realization hit him all at once. I am convinced that in that moment he understood that I was a woman. I felt it in the way his body shifted, in the way his breathing changed. He got off of me and stood up. Then he pointed toward the dark alley. "Come with me," he said. My stomach twisted painfully. Fear settled deep in my gut, heavier and darker than anything I had felt before. I remembered hearing about a recent wave of sexual assaults in my neighborhood. Some of them had happened during the daytime, which made them even more terrifying. When he pointed toward that dirty, narrow alley, my mind filled in the blanks. I knew without any doubt that going down there would be the end of me. Inside my head, two voices began arguing. One voice told me there was no way I was going into that alley without a fight. The other voice reminded me that he had a gun, and fighting could get me killed instantly. While my thoughts raced, his real voice shouted again, ordering me to follow him. And then somehow I did the only thing I could think of. I talked. I told him I was coming. I told him I was following him. I made my voice sound obedient, cooperative, calm. And he believed me. That was his mistake. I took one small step backward, then another. Slowly, carefully, toward the sidewalk. He turned his body toward the alley, angling the gun away from me for just a second. That second was everything. I took a deep breath, tucked my head down, and started running. I ran as hard as I could, my legs moving on pure instinct. I expected to hear gunshots at any moment. I expected pain. I expected everything to end. Instead, I heard screaming, high-pitched, desperate screaming. It took a moment before I realized it was coming from me. I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I ran 6 or 7 blocks before I slowed down, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. Eventually, I made my way back to my apartment, taking a long route, terrified that he might see where I lived. When the police checked the alleyway later, the man was gone. There was no trace of him. The only proof that the encounter had even happened was my banana peel, left behind and slowly turning brown on the pavement, and the adrenaline that stayed with me for days afterward. Even now, that memory still bothers me. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. I am grateful beyond words that I am haunted only by the what-ifs, and not by the things that could have been so much worse. I am completely sure this really happened. I know how unbelievable it sounds when I say it out loud, but I remember every detail clearly. I am 23 years old now, and this happened about 10 years ago when I was around 13 or 14. At that age, life felt easy and predictable. My biggest concerns were school, friends, and figuring out how to spend my free time. I never imagined that one random afternoon would leave such a deep mark on me, a fear that would quietly follow me for years. When I was a teenager, skateboarding was my whole world. It wasn't just something I did for fun. It was how I spent time with my friends, how we bonded, and how we escaped boredom. Almost every day after school, I was out skating with my friends Tim and Brandon. We lived in a small town where people often recognized each other's faces, but didn't always know names. It was the kind of town where parents felt comfortable letting their kids roam around on their own. It felt safe. Looking back now, maybe it felt too safe. One afternoon, after skating for hours, we decided to go to the local 7-Eleven. This wasn't unusual for us. It was part of our routine. We would skate around town, practice tricks, laugh at each other when someone fell, and then reward ourselves with cheap snacks and cold drinks. Since we were only 13 or 14, none of us drove. Our skateboards were our only transportation, and at that age, that felt completely normal. We skated to the 7-Eleven without giving it much thought. The weather was normal. There was nothing strange or unsettling about the day. The store was busy enough, with people walking in and out, cars pulling up to the gas pumps, engines starting and stopping. Everything felt ordinary and familiar. We went inside, grabbed our drinks, joked around like always, paid, and walked back out. After leaving the store, we headed toward the exit of the parking lot. To get home, we had to cross the highway. It wasn't a massive highway like you'd see in a big city, but it wasn't empty either. It was a small-town highway with steady traffic. You still had to wait for the traffic light to change before crossing safely. As we stood there waiting for the light to turn red, something made me look back toward the gas pumps. I still don't know why I turned around. Maybe it was instinct, maybe boredom, maybe something in my body sensed danger before my mind did. Whatever the reason, that small moment changed everything. I noticed a man standing by one of the pumps. He looked to be around 40 or 50 years old. He was pumping gas into a white truck. At first, there was nothing obviously strange about him. He looked like any other customer you might see at a gas station. But then I noticed the way he was looking at me. He wasn't glancing. He wasn't casually looking around. He was staring. His eyes were fixed on me in a way that made my skin crawl. Before I could even say anything to my friends, the man suddenly dropped the gas pump. He didn't bother putting it back or shutting anything off properly. He rushed into his truck, slammed the door, and started the engine with urgency. The sound of the engine revving felt too loud, too aggressive. The next few seconds didn't feel real. The truck shot forward, my tires squealing as he slammed down on the gas. He drove straight at us. There was no hesitation, no attempt to slow down. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. We barely had time to react. The truck missed us by inches. I felt a sharp pain in my arm as it brushed past me, knocking my skateboard right out of my hand. I stumbled but somehow managed to stay on my feet. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I could hear Brandon yelling, screaming at the man in shock and anger, swearing as the truck sped past us. The man didn't stop. He peeled out of the parking lot and disappeared into the lot next door. For a brief moment, I hoped that was the end of it. I hoped he was gone, that maybe he was drunk or angry or unstable, and that he would just drive away. But that hope didn't last. Between the two parking lots was a ditch. Without slowing down, the man drove straight through it, bouncing violently, and came back at us again. Seeing that white truck coming toward us a second time made everything painfully clear. He wasn't just being reckless. He was trying to hurt us. He was trying to kill us. That was the moment panic fully took over. All three of us started running. We didn't care about the traffic light anymore. We ran straight across the highway, cars honking and tires screeching as drivers slammed on their brakes. None of that mattered. All that mattered was getting away. We ran toward the local library about 2 or 3 blocks away. It felt much farther than that. My lungs burned, my legs felt heavy, and every step felt like it might be my last. When I looked back, I saw the white truck speeding toward us again. The man behind the wheel looked furious, like something had completely snapped inside him. Tim and Brandon ran straight toward the library doors. Suddenly I remembered something that made my stomach drop. It was Sunday. The library would be closed. Panic hit me again, and I made a split-second decision. I turned and ran toward the woods instead. There was a narrow trail back there that led close to my backyard. In that moment, it felt like my only chance. As I reached the edge of the parking lot, I looked back one last time. The man had stopped his truck. He jumped out and ran to the back. I saw him grab something from the truck bed. I couldn't tell exactly what it was. From where I stood, it looked like either a shotgun or a crowbar. My vision was blurred from fear and exhaustion. But I knew that whatever it wasn't good. That image burned into my mind. I ran into the woods without thinking. Branches scratched my face and arms. The ground was uneven and I almost tripped several times. My heart was pounding so hard it felt painful. I expected to hear footsteps behind me. I expected to hear shouting or a gunshot. Every sound made me flinch. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighborhood. When I finally reached my street, my neighbor, Tim's dad, saw me and immediately told me to get into his car. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He just said we needed to go to the video store where Tim's mom worked. The look on his face told me everything. Something serious had happened. At the video store, I saw Tim and Brandon standing with 3 police officers. They looked pale and shaken. When my mom arrived moments later, she was crying uncontrollably. Tim and Brandon had told her they didn't know if I was alive. For a while, everyone believed I had been taken. Later, Tim told me something that still makes my stomach turn. He said that after I ran toward the woods, he saw the man chasing after me, not them. Hearing that felt like a punch to the chest. I had believed the man was focused on my friends. I never realized that he had chosen me. The man was never caught. For years after that day, I couldn't look at a white truck without feeling sick. Every time one passed by, my heart would start racing. I spent the next 5 years constantly looking over my shoulder, replaying that afternoon in my mind, wondering how close I had come to never making it home. What makes it even more disturbing is that there were people everywhere. This wasn't an empty town. There were dozens, maybe even 100 people around. Cars, pedestrians, customers at the store. And yet, when 3 kids were running for their lives, no one stepped in. No one stopped him. No one helped. We didn't provoke him. We didn't do anything wrong. We were just kids trying to get home. And for reasons I will never understand, a stranger turned an ordinary afternoon into a nightmare that still follows me to this day. About 25 years ago, I was driving to a friend's house on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It was one of those days where the roads feel strangely empty, especially in parts of town that are usually busy during the work week. I was heading through an industrial area in South Tucson, a stretch of road lined with warehouses, fenced-off lots, and wide-open spaces that felt abandoned on weekends. Most of the businesses were closed, and there were no pedestrians, no traffic, and no signs of life. I was driving along a 2-way road with 1 lane in each direction. The speed limit was 40 miles per hour, and under normal circumstances, that road flowed pretty smoothly. As I rounded a gentle bend, I came up behind another car. Right away, I noticed something was off. The car ahead of me was moving incredibly slowly, my barely going 15 miles per hour. At first, I assumed the driver might be lost, distracted, or having some kind of mechanical issue. I gave them some space, hoping they would either speed up or pull over. They didn't. The road stretched out ahead of us, straight and clear, with no oncoming traffic in sight. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to pass. I checked my mirrors, signaled, and moved into the opposite lane to go around them. That's when everything went wrong. The moment I pulled alongside the car, the driver suddenly accelerated, not just a little, but aggressively. Before I could react, he swerved and slammed his car directly into mine. The impact was violent and unexpected. My car was forced off the road, tires skidding as I fought to keep control. My heart jumped into my throat as adrenaline flooded my system. I managed to steer enough to avoid rolling, but the car came to a hard stop on the side of the road. For a moment, everything went silent. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the steering wheel. My ears rang and my chest felt tight. I was alive, but I was completely stunned. I sat there trying to process what had just happened, replaying the moment over and over in my head, wondering why someone would do that for no reason at all. Then I looked up. Standing about 10 feet away from where my car had stopped were two men. They were just standing there, not moving, not speaking, simply watching. What struck me immediately was how out of place they looked. One was a pale, red-headed man. The other was Asian, in an area that was almost entirely Hispanic, in a part of town that felt completely deserted on a Sunday. So their presence felt surreal. There were no buildings nearby that looked occupied, no parked cars, no reason for anyone to be standing there at all, let alone two people who looked like they didn't belong in that environment. They weren't dressed like construction workers or warehouse employees. They weren't holding anything. They weren't reacting to the crash with panic or curiosity. They were just there. I barely had time to register them before the other driver opened his car door. He stepped out quickly, his body language tense and aggressive. Even from a distance, I could see the anger on his face. His shoulders were tight, his posture rigid, and his movements sharp. He looked like someone who was fully prepared to continue whatever violence he had started on the road. I remember thinking that I was about to be seriously hurt, maybe worse. As he started walking toward me, his eyes shifted. He noticed the two men standing nearby. Everything changed in that instant. He stopped walking. His expression shifted from rage to something closer to confusion, maybe even fear. He looked from them to me, then back to them again. The moment stretched out uncomfortably, like time had slowed down. Without saying a word, he turned around, walked back to his car, got inside, and drove away. Just like that. No shouting, no threats, no confrontation. He didn't even look back. I didn't stick around either. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there as fast as possible. I restarted my car, which thankfully still ran, and drove away with my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I was far from that place, surrounded by other cars and people. But the image of those two men stayed with me. I've thought about that moment countless times over the years, about how unlikely it was that they were there at all, about how perfectly timed their presence was, about how a man who had just intentionally rammed my car suddenly lost all interest in continuing his attack. The second he saw them, they didn't intervene, they didn't speak, they didn't move, they just existed. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in miracles or divine intervention in the traditional sense. But I also can't explain what happened that day in any ordinary way. In a place that felt like a ghost town, two people appeared at exactly the right moment, and their mere presence was enough to stop someone who clearly meant me harm. Sometimes late at night, I replay that scene in my mind and wonder what would have happened if they hadn't been there. Would the man have reached my car? Would he have dragged me out? Would anyone have come to help in time? There were no witnesses, no traffic, no security cameras that I knew of. Just empty road and hot desert air. I never saw those two men again. I don't know who they were, I don't know why they were there, and I don't know why they seemed so calm while everything else was chaos. All I know is that something about them was enough to change the course of that encounter completely. Call it coincidence, call it luck, call it whatever you want. But if there is such a thing as guardian angels, or some equivalent force in this world that steps in quietly and without explanation, I believe that day was my closest encounter with it. And the fact that I'll never know for sure is what makes it so unsettling. When I was living in Oslo, I shared an apartment with two other girls. From the very beginning, that place felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't dramatic or obvious at first. There were no loud noises, no shadows moving in the corners of your eyes. It was more subtle than that. A constant sense that something was off, like the apartment itself carried a heavy mood that never fully lifted. The building was old, dating back to the mid-1800s. From the outside, it looked charming in that classic European way, with thick walls and tall windows. Inside, though, it felt different. The hallways were narrow, and the floors creaked in a way that didn't sound normal, even for an old building. It wasn't the kind of creaking that followed footsteps. It was random, uneven, and often happened when no one was moving at all. There were 3 bedrooms in the apartment. One of them in particular terrified me. I avoided that room whenever I could. Every time I stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. It didn't matter if the rest of the apartment was warm. That room always felt cold, like the heat simply refused to enter it. The air felt heavier too, almost damp, even though there was no visible reason for it. What made it worse was the thoughts that came into my head whenever I was in there. I didn't imagine things visually, but I would suddenly feel overwhelmed by the idea of children crying. Not normal crying, but desperate, panicked sounds. I would get this strong impression that children had been in danger there, like something terrible had happened long ago and left an emotional stain behind. I know that sounds vague, but that's the best way I can describe it. The thoughts didn't feel like my own. They just appeared, fully formed, and filled me with anxiety. I could never stay in that room for long. After a minute or two, my chest would tighten and I would feel the need to leave immediately, like my body was warning me to get out. My bedroom was what used to be the living room of the apartment, judging by its size and layout. One night, I went to bed feeling exhausted, both physically and mentally. I fell asleep quickly, but sometime later, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. The room was dark, and for a few seconds, I lay there trying to understand what had disturbed me. Then I heard it. A low, animal-like growl. It sounded like a large dog or a big cat, deep and aggressive. It wasn't distant. It felt like it was right there in the room with me. My heart started racing immediately. I tried to move, to sit up or roll over, but I couldn't. My body felt completely pinned down, as if an enormous weight was pressing into my chest and limbs. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move my arms or legs. I couldn't even turn my head. The growling continued, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was making the sound was aware that I was awake and helpless. I remember staring into the darkness, expecting at any moment to see something appear. But there was nothing. No shape, no shadow, no movement. The fear was overwhelming. My mind raced through every possibility, but none of them made sense. I felt completely trapped inside my own body. Eventually, after what felt like forever but was probably only seconds or minutes, the pressure lifted. I could move again. The sound stopped. I lay there shaking, drenched in sweat, afraid to even sit up. I didn't sleep again that night. Not long after that, something even worse happened. One of the girls I lived with had a cat. It was young, barely a year old, playful, and full of energy. There had been no signs of illness at all. One evening, we were all at home, just relaxing, talking, and doing our own things. Everything felt normal. Then we heard a horrible noise coming from the bathroom. It was the cat. When we rushed in, we found it lying on the floor. Its tongue was hanging out, and it was gasping for air, making these awful choking sounds. It was clearly in distress, but we had no idea what was happening. We tried to help, but there was nothing we could do. The cat lay there, struggling to breathe, making those sounds that I still hear in my head sometimes. It took about 10 minutes. Then it was gone. The suddenness of it was shocking. There had been no warning, no illness, no explanation. The apartment felt different after that. Heavier, quieter, as if something had settled in after taking what it wanted. After that night, none of us felt comfortable there anymore. The strange atmosphere seemed stronger. The cold room felt colder. The nights felt longer. Every sound made me tense. I found myself listening constantly, even in my sleep, waiting for something else to happen. I moved out shortly after. To this day, I consider myself a skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits in the traditional sense. I don't jump to paranormal explanations easily, but I also can't deny how that apartment made me feel. The fear was real. The experiences were real, and whatever caused them, whether psychological, environmental, or something else entirely, that place was deeply unnerving. Some locations carry a weight that doesn't fade with time. That apartment in Oslo was one of them, and I've never experienced anything like it since. A friend of mine and I were driving home from high school one afternoon. The kind of day that felt completely ordinary. School had been long and boring, and all we wanted to do was get home, eat something, and forget about the day. We had taken this route countless times before. It was familiar, predictable, and never gave us any reason to feel unsafe. We were talking casually, half paying attention to the road, half laughing about something that had happened earlier at school. As we approached a large intersection, the light ahead turned red. Cars lined up in every direction, engines idling, everyone waiting for the next signal. When the left turn arrow finally turned green, my friend accelerated, maybe a little too fast. The tires chirped and peeled out for a brief second before gripping the road again. At the time, it felt harmless. Just a teenager being impatient. That's when I noticed the green pickup truck behind us. It had been sitting quietly at the light, but as soon as we moved, it sped up aggressively. Within seconds, it pulled up beside us on the left. I turned my head and saw the driver clearly. He was bald, older than us, and his face was twisted with anger. Even though his window was rolled up, it was obvious he was yelling. His mouth was moving fast, his jaw clenched, and his eyes were locked on us. A chill ran through me. At first, I tried to convince myself that he was just mad about the tires peeling. That happens. People get annoyed on the road all the time. I assumed he would speed past us or turn off somewhere else, and that would be the end of it. But he didn't. We reached another red light, and my stomach dropped when I saw the truck slow down and pull up right next to us again. This time, he was perfectly aligned with our car on the left side. I leaned toward my friend and told him the truck was still there. My friend glanced over, and I could see the tension hit his face instantly. The man started motioning for us to roll down our window. We didn't want to engage. My friend shook his head slightly and tried to decline politely, keeping his eyes forward. We hoped ignoring him would make him lose interest. Instead, it seemed to make him angrier. His expression changed. He stopped yelling and smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was cold and unsettling. Then he raised his hand, shaped his fingers like a gun, and pointed it directly at us. Slowly, deliberately, he pointed it at his own head and mimed pulling the trigger. Now my heart slammed against my chest. For a moment I didn't even know how to react. It felt unreal, like something you'd see in a movie, not real life. But there was nothing playful about his face. His eyes were flat and serious. He wasn't joking. Then he leaned toward his glove box. That was the moment pure fear took over. The light turned green. My friend didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot down on the gas, and we shot forward. The engine roared as we sped through the intersection. For a split second, I thought maybe we had escaped. Then I heard the sound behind us. The pickup truck peeled out and came after us. He was tailgating us so closely that I could barely see his headlights in the mirror. Every move my friend made, the truck copied. Lane change, speed adjustment, turns. He stayed glued to us like he was hunting us. My breathing became shallow and my hands started shaking uncontrollably. My mind raced with horrible thoughts. I kept replaying that gun gesture in my head. I imagined him pulling a real weapon from the glove box. I imagined gunshots. I imagined us losing control and crashing. I told my friend we needed to get off the main road. I knew my neighborhood well. The streets were narrow and confusing if you weren't familiar with them. If we could get ahead of him even slightly, we might be able to turn quickly and disappear before he realized where we went. We turned toward my neighborhood. The truck followed. The houses started to blur as we sped through residential streets. Trees flashed past the windows. I saw lights turn on in a few houses as people noticed a car flying through their street. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see a gun sticking out of the truck's window. At one point, I told my friend to speed up and prepare to turn. I spotted a subdivision entrance and yelled for him to take it. We turned sharply, tires screeching slightly as we entered the subdivision. The truck was still there. Panic surged again. My chest felt tight and my mouth went dry. I thought we were out of options. Then I saw it. A busy-looking cul-de-sac with multiple cars parked in driveways and porch lights on. It looked lived in, safe, normal. I told my friend to pull into it and park behind another car, like we belonged there. We turned in and stopped. The engine shut off. The sudden silence felt overwhelming. My ears rang, and I realized I had been holding my breath. We ducked low in our seats, barely daring to move. Seconds felt like minutes. Every sound made my heart jump. Then the truck appeared. It rolled past the entrance to the cul-de-sac slowly, too slowly. I was certain he would turn in. I was sure he had seen us, but he didn't. The green pickup continued down the road and disappeared from view. I felt my whole body go weak with relief. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then nervous laughter spilled out, shaky and forced. The kind of laughter that comes when your body doesn't know how else to react after fear. We kept saying how crazy it was, how unreal it felt, how close it could have been. But deep down, we both knew how serious it was. We didn't drive home right away. We called the police and explained what happened. An officer met up with us nearby and stayed with us until we felt safe enough to get home. Just seeing the police car made me feel grounded again, like reality had finally caught up with the nightmare. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every passing car outside my house made my heart race. Every engine sound made me tense. I kept seeing the man's face in my head, the anger, the smile, the way he made that gesture without hesitation. We never saw him again. But even years later, that fear still lingers. When someone drives too close behind me, my body reacts before my mind does. My chest tightens, my hands shake. That one drive home changed the way I see the road forever. I was 16 years old when this happened. Old enough to feel grown, but still young enough to believe that bad things only happened to other people. At that time, I worked as a cleaner at my school after classes ended. It wasn't a job I loved, but it gave me a little money and a sense of independence. By the time my shift finished each day, the school was empty. The halls echoed, the lights were dimmed, and the air felt heavy and still. When I finally stepped outside in the evening, the streets were quiet. Most students had already gone home hours earlier. Parents had picked up their kids. Buses were gone. Shops were closing. I liked that calm at first. It felt peaceful, like the world was slowing down just for me. My walk home took about 15 minutes. It followed the same route every day, past a main road and then through quieter residential streets. I had taken it so many times that I barely thought about it anymore. I listened to music, daydreamed, or replayed conversations from school in my head. I never felt unsafe. That changed the first time I noticed him. It was a normal evening. Nothing stood out. I had just left the school grounds and was walking down the main stretch of road when I felt that strange sensation you get when someone is watching you. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet, uncomfortable awareness. I glanced over my shoulder. There was a man walking behind me. He wasn't close enough to be threatening, but he wasn't far either, just far enough to be noticeable. At first glance, he looked ordinary, but when I looked a little longer, something felt wrong. His face looked unnaturally smooth, almost like plastic stretched tight over bone, and he was smiling, not a wide smile, just a faint, subtle curve of his lips, like he was amused by something I couldn't see. I told myself I was imagining it. People walk the same routes every day. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was heading home from work. I kept walking and forced myself not to look back again. When I reached my street, I went inside and forgot about him completely. 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Same road, same distance behind me, same strange smile. This time, my stomach tightened. Coincidence didn't feel like a good enough explanation anymore. Still, I didn't tell anyone. I was 16 and I knew exactly what would happen if I did. My parents would panic. They would insist on picking me up every day. My independence would disappear overnight. So I stayed quiet. After that, I saw him every single day, always after work. Always on the same stretch of road, never speaking, never changing his pace, just walking behind me, smiling softly as if following me was the most normal thing in the world. I started paying attention to details. Some days I walked slower. He slowed down. Other days I sped up. He matched my pace perfectly. Once I crossed the road suddenly, pretending to check my phone. He crossed too, without hesitation. The streets were always quiet. Too quiet. I stopped listening to music. I wanted to hear everything. The sound of my own footsteps. The sound of his. Slow, even, controlled. I began watching reflections in shop windows and parked cars instead of turning around fully. Every time, he was there. Weeks passed like this. Nothing happened. And somehow, that made it worse. Then came the weekend. I wasn't working that day. I was walking to a friend's house in the afternoon. The route was similar to my usual walk home, and the sky was gray and heavy. As I turned onto the main road, something made me look toward the bottom of the street. A minibus was parked there. It looked out of place, sitting alone on the quiet road. I don't know why I looked inside. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. He was sitting in the driver's seat. The same man. Same smooth face. Same faint smile. Staring directly at me. My heart dropped so hard it felt like it stopped beating for a moment. I froze, then forced myself to keep walking. My hands shook as I pulled my phone out and called my friend. I made my voice loud and obvious, laughing too much, speaking too fast. I told her where I was. See, I asked her to open her front door and wait for me. When I looked back again, he was no longer in the minibus. He was behind me, much closer this time, about 2 meters away, smiling. Cold fear rushed through my body. I started walking faster. He did too. I could hear his footsteps clearly now, matching mine exactly. I didn't run yet. Running felt dangerous, like it might provoke him. I kept talking on the phone. My voice sounded strange, thin and shaky. I told my friend I could see her house. I told her to keep the door open. I could feel him behind me like pressure on my back. When I reached her house, I ran. I sprinted inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My friend locked the second lock and the chain. We stood there, breathing hard, listening. He was outside, standing on the pavement, smiling. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring through the window. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. He never changed expression. Eventually, my friend's parents came home. We told them everything. They called the police. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. After that day, I never saw him again. Years later, I moved away. Life went on, but that fear stayed with me. Last weekend, I visited my parents. The minibus was still there, parked in the exact same spot. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. But it wasn't the kind of farm most people imagine. There were no wide fields of crops or rows of vegetables stretching into the distance. Instead, our land was a pine tree harvest. Pine needles were a big business for landscaping, and every year we would bale pine straw for sale. Because of that, our home sat deep in the woods, surrounded by perfectly lined rows of longleaf pine trees. There were 550 acres of them. The trees were planted in neat, almost unnatural lines, stretching so far that they disappeared into the distance. When you stood still and looked out, it felt like the forest went on forever. There were no nearby neighbors. The land around ours belonged to a large paper company at the time, which meant miles and miles of untouched woodland. You didn't see people unless they had a reason to be there. That isolation was normal to me back then. I grew up with it. But looking back now, I understand how unsettling it really was. Our house itself was strange. It wasn't a standard farmhouse or a simple country home. It had been custom-built decades earlier, sometime in the 1930s, by a dentist who clearly had unusual taste. I don't remember all the architectural details, but I remember how wrong it felt. Nothing about it followed normal logic. Hallways angled oddly. Rooms were shaped strangely. It felt more like a place designed by someone who wanted to be different than someone who wanted to be comfortable. The living room was the worst part. One entire wall of the living room was a massive picture window. It stretched nearly the full length of the room, close to 50 feet across. The house sat on a slight hill, so the living room itself was raised 5 or 6 feet off the ground. From that window, you could see straight out into the pine forest, a solid mile of trees in perfect rows. During the day, it was impressive. At night, it was terrifying. In the winter, it became even worse. We didn't get much snow in that part of North Carolina, but sometimes we'd get just enough to lightly coat the ground. That thin layer of snow would reflect moonlight, making the forest glow faintly in the dark. You could see shadows clearly. You could see movement. You could see our dogs running far out in the trees at night, chasing things you never saw clearly. I hated that room. I hated that window. It always felt like something could see in. But even though I knew logically that no one should be out there, one weekend I had a cousin staying over. Like most kids who grow up in the country, we spent our time doing stupid, harmless things to keep ourselves entertained. That evening, we were messing around with the fireplace, tossing random small objects into the dying fire just to see what would happen. Eventually, it got late. The fire burned down to glowing embers, and we decided to sleep in the living room. We built a makeshift bed out of couch cushions and blankets, turning it into a little fort on the floor. Everything felt normal, comfortable, quiet. Then the dogs started barking. They weren't close. They were far out in the woods. Our property stretched nearly a mile in some directions, so it wasn't unusual for them to chase animals away from the edges of the land. Coyotes, deer, or anything else that wandered too close. I didn't think much of it at first. The barking went on longer than usual. My cousin stood up and walked closer to the window. He stared out into the trees without saying anything. At first, I thought he was just watching the dogs, but after a minute, it felt wrong. He was too still, too focused. I asked him what he was looking at. He didn't answer right away. He just said that he felt like he was seeing something, but he wasn't sure. That made my chest tighten. I got up and stood beside him, staring out through the glass. At first, there was nothing, just rows of trees, pale ground, and shadows stretching between the trunks. Minutes passed. My cousin started getting irritated with me because I kept asking what he saw. He shushed me, telling me to be quiet so he could focus. And then we both saw it. A shadow moved from one tree to another. It wasn't fast. It didn't run or jump. It walked, calmly, purposefully, from the cover of one tree to the next. It was about 100 yards away from the house. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow and slush, it was hard to tell details. We couldn't even be sure if it was moving closer or just crossing sideways through the trees. We didn't scream. We didn't run. There was still that small part of our minds telling us we might be wrong, that maybe our eyes were playing tricks on us. So we just stood there, staring. We should have woken my dad immediately, but my father was the kind of man who believed in handling things himself. The type who would walk out onto the patio with a rifle and yell into the woods. We didn't want to provoke whatever we might be seeing. About 3 minutes later, it happened again. Another shadow, another tree, this time closer than before, maybe 50 feet from the first spot. The same slow, deliberate movement. Then again, and again. For nearly half an hour, we watched as at least 2 figures appeared intermittently between the trees. Sometimes one, sometimes the other. They would move a short distance, disappear behind a trunk, and then vanish completely. The forest felt alive. I want to be clear about something. We did not have neighbors. There were no houses nearby. No reason for anyone to be walking through our land at night. If someone was out there, they were there intentionally. Eventually, something changed. One of the figures appeared again, but this time it didn't disappear behind a tree. Instead, it moved forward, fast, running. That was when we lost it. We ran to my dad's room and woke him up, talking over each other, trying to explain what we had seen. By the time he followed us back to the living room, the forest was empty. No movement, no shadows. Still, we were terrified. We locked every door and window in the house, something we almost never did living out in the country. Each door felt worse than the last. Every time we reached for a lock, we expected someone to be on the other side. That never happened, but the fear didn't fade. We walked the house over and over, checking every room. Finally, we convinced my dad to stay in the living room with us. He fell asleep on the couch while we stayed awake, staring out that massive window until morning. The next day, we went outside. There were footprints everywhere, clear impressions in the snow, weaving between the trees. We followed them and eventually found where someone had stood directly in front of the window, close enough that we wouldn't have seen them from inside because of the height of the room. They had been right beneath us. We were driving through the Catalucci side of the park on a cold day, just taking our time and enjoying the quiet. It was one of those slow trips where there's no real plan, just the road ahead and the scenery around you. The trees were bare, the sky was pale, and everything felt still in that late-season way, when winter is close but hasn't fully arrived yet. The road curved through the mountains, and there were long stretches where we didn't pass another car. It felt peaceful, but also strangely isolated. At one point, we decided to stop at one of the mountain overlooks. It was the kind of overlook you don't really plan for. You just see the sign and think, why not? The parking area was small, just enough space for a few cars. And when we pulled in, we noticed immediately that we were alone. No other vehicles, no engine noise. Was nothing. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the quiet ticking of our car, cooling down after the drive. This overlook had a short trail that started right from the parking lot. It wasn't long, just a narrow path that climbed gently upward and curved around a few large boulders before reaching the viewing point. As we stepped out of the car and started walking toward the trail, that's when we saw her. An elderly woman was sitting on a small boulder near the start of the path. She was wearing a red sweater that stood out sharply against the muted colors of the forest. Everything else around us was gray, brown, and faded green, but that red sweater caught the eye immediately. She was sitting very still, almost too still, with her hands resting in her lap. She didn't look at us when we passed her, didn't nod or smile or acknowledge us in any way. At the time, it didn't feel scary. It was just a little unusual. We assumed she had come up with someone else and was waiting while they walked the trail, or maybe she was just resting. The thought crossed my mind that she seemed underdressed for how cold it was, but I didn't dwell on it. We continued up the trail, stepping carefully over loose stones and around the larger rocks that lined the path. As we climbed higher, the wind picked up. By the time we reached the overlook, it was blowing hard enough that it cut straight through our jackets. The view was nice, but it was hard to enjoy it, with the cold biting at our faces. We stood there for a moment, looked out over the mountains, and then agreed it wasn't worth staying long. We turned around and started heading back down the trail. As we walked, I found myself thinking about the elderly woman again. The image of her sitting there in just a sweater kept coming back to me. It was colder than it looked, and the wind up at the overlook had been brutal. I started to feel concerned. I thought maybe we should offer her a ride, at least down to town or somewhere warmer. It felt like the right thing to do. We rounded the last curve in the trail, expecting to see her sitting in the same spot. But the boulder was empty. At first, I thought I just hadn't spotted her yet. Maybe she had moved slightly, or maybe she was standing somewhere nearby. We reached the parking lot and looked around. There was no one there. No movement, no sound, no sign of her at all. The lot was exactly the same as when we had arrived, except now it felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. My wife noticed it too. She stopped and looked around, her expression changing from casual to confused. We both scanned the area, checking behind the boulders, along the edge of the trail, and around the parked cars, even though there were none besides ours. The woman was simply gone. That's when the unease started to creep in. It didn't make sense. We hadn't been gone long. The trail was short, and there was really only one way in and out. If she had left, we should have seen her. There was nowhere she could have gone without passing us or being visible from the trail or the parking lot. We got back into the car, still trying to make sense of it. I drove slowly up and down the road, near the overlook, thinking maybe she had walked along the roadside. We kept our eyes open, scanning both sides of the road, expecting to see a flash of red somewhere among the trees, but there was nothing. No elderly woman, no red sweater, no sign that anyone else had been there at all. We even pulled over once and got out again just to look more carefully. The wind was still blowing, the trees still creaked softly, but the place felt empty in a way that made my skin prickle. It was like the area had reset itself, as if the moment with the woman had never happened. As we continued driving, neither of us said much. We both felt it, that quiet, unsettled feeling that comes when something doesn't add up. It wasn't outright fear, not at first. It was more like confusion mixed with a growing sense of discomfort. The logical explanations didn't fit neatly. An elderly woman disappearing that quickly without a trace in an isolated mountain overlook. I just didn't sit right. Later, as we talked about it, we went over every detail again and again. We tried to convince ourselves there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she had a car we didn't notice, parked somewhere out of sight. Maybe she walked faster than we thought. Maybe we just missed something obvious. But no matter how we turned it over in our minds, it never fully made sense. What stayed with me the most was how real she had looked. She wasn't a shadow or a glimpse or something half-seen. She was solid, clear, and ordinary. An elderly woman sitting on a rock, wearing a red sweater on a cold day in the mountains. There was nothing strange about her appearance at all, and that somehow made the disappearance more unsettling. As time passed, the memory didn't fade the way most small, strange moments do. It stayed sharp. By every now and then, something would remind me of it. A red sweater in a crowd, a quiet overlook on a road trip, and that feeling would come back. The sense that we had witnessed something we weren't meant to understand. I still don't know what happened that day. I don't claim it was anything paranormal, and I don't claim it wasn't. All I know is that two of us saw the same thing, noticed the same details, and were left with the same unanswered questions. It was brief, quiet, and subtle, but it left a deep impression. Even now, thinking about that overlook, I can picture it clearly. The empty parking lot, the short, winding trail, the large boulders, and that spot where the woman had been sitting. It's strange how something so simple can feel so unsettling in hindsight. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden shock, just a presence, and then an absence, and the silence that followed. Whenever I hear similar stories about roadside encounters or strange figures seen briefly and then gone, I think back to that day. It reminds me that sometimes the most unsettling experiences aren't loud or violent or obvious. Sometimes they're quiet, ordinary moments that don't make sense and stay with you long after the road has carried you somewhere else. Over the summer, I went on a long road trip with my sister, her partner, and their dog. We were driving through southern Oregon and northern California, taking our time and enjoying the trip instead of rushing. It was supposed to be a relaxed journey, the kind where you stop when you feel like it, stretch your legs, and enjoy the scenery. None of us expected that one stop along the way would stay with us so strongly, even months later. What happened at a rest stop off Highway 199 still genuinely freaks all of us out, mostly because each of us remembers parts of it differently, and because some of the people and vehicles we saw seemed to vanish without any normal explanation. The strangest part is that all of this happened in broad daylight. After leaving Interstate 5 near Grants Pass, Oregon, we turned onto Highway 199 and headed toward the coast. The road immediately became more scenic. Tall trees lined both sides, and the sunlight filtered through the branches in a way that should have felt calming. I've driven plenty of forested mountain roads before, and usually I enjoy them. But this time, not long after we got onto Highway 199, I started to feel something I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a heavy feeling settled over me, like the air itself felt different. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't want to sound dramatic. There was no obvious reason to feel uneasy. The weather was perfect, the road was clear, and everything looked normal. As we continued driving, we passed through Cave Junction, Oregon. Almost immediately, all of us felt uncomfortable there. It wasn't subtle. The town had a rough, sketchy vibe that was hard to ignore. It felt like the kind of place where you keep your doors locked and don't linger. None of us wanted to stop there, not even for gas or a bathroom break. We all silently agreed to just keep driving, even though we could have used a stop. The unease that had started earlier felt stronger after passing through that town. Not long after crossing into California, we went through a tunnel, and right after that, we decided to pull into the Collier tunnel rest area to use the bathroom. It felt like a relief to finally stop. The rest area was surrounded by trees and felt fairly isolated. When we pulled in, we noticed there was only one other car parked in the spots closest to the entrance. We parked 2 spaces away from it. Everything seemed normal at first, but that didn't last. Almost immediately, we noticed a white dog wandering around in the pet area. It looked like some kind of pit bull mix, or at least something similar. What stood out was that it had no collar, and there was no owner anywhere in sight. The dog wasn't acting aggressive, but it was clearly alone. Because of that, we didn't want to let our own dog out yet. Instead, we stayed in the car and watched closely, waiting to see if someone would come claim it. My sister and I decided to go to the bathroom while her partner stayed behind with the dog. As we walked toward the restroom, we noticed a van parked nearby. Its doors were open, and inside was a woman digging through things. A man was nearby, yelling at her. They were playing loud music, and I distinctly remember that it was Eminem because it was a song I recognized and liked. The volume was high enough that it felt out of place in such a quiet, wooded area. Inside the bathroom, while I was washing my hands, my sister stood in the doorway with the door open. From that spot, you couldn't actually see the van because of a barrier between the bathroom doors and that side of the parking area. Even so, we could still hear the music clearly at the same volume. It didn't sound like it was moving away or getting quieter. It sounded like it was still coming from the same place. We were only in the bathroom for a short time, maybe 10 seconds after the song changed. When we walked back out, I didn't look directly toward the van again. I just assumed it was still there. We walked back to the car, and my sister's partner went into the restroom next. While we waited, my sister and I kept watching the white dog. Around this time, the man from the only other car parked nearby got out. He looked like an older man with a large white beard and a plaid shirt. He looked rough, like someone who had lived a hard life. He started calling out to the dog, trying to get its attention. The dog didn't respond at all. It didn't even look at him, which made me think the dog probably wasn't his. The man went back to his car, grabbed a dog bowl from the back seat, and walked toward the restrooms, presumably to fill it with water. When he came back, he sat in his car with the door open and continued calling for the dog. The whole time, the dog just kept wandering, completely uninterested in him. Then another car pulled in and parked between our vehicle and the man's. Shortly after that, my sister's partner came back from the restroom. We decided to leave since the situation felt strange, and we were eager to move on. As we began pulling out, something shocking happened. The dog, the man, and his car were just gone. Completely gone. There was no sound of a car backing out, no vehicle passing us, nothing. This rest area was designed in a large loop. To exit, you had to drive around the circle and pass the entrance again. There was no other way out. That car would have had to drive past us, and we would have seen it. My sister and I reacted at the exact same time. We both said things like, "Where did they go?" And I was watching them. We were genuinely confused. We had been paying close attention, specifically waiting for them to leave so we could safely let our dog out. Since the area now appeared to be free of the loose dog, my sister's partner pulled back around to the pet area. Normally our dog wants out of the car immediately anytime we stop. This time was different. He resisted hard. He didn't want to get out at all. We actually had to pull him out physically, which was extremely unusual for him. Once he was outside, his behavior was even stranger. He started sniffing the ground frantically, like he was overwhelmed by smells. Then he jumped suddenly, like something startled him, even though there was nothing there that we could see. He refused to go to the bathroom and kept acting anxious. At that point, the feeling of unease I had earlier became overwhelming. It felt intense and heavy, like something was deeply wrong with that place. None of us said much after that. We got back into the car and continued driving, sitting in almost complete silence for a long time. That night, after we reached our hotel and had some distance from the experience, we finally started talking about what had happened in more detail. That's when things got even stranger. My sister and I realized our accounts matched perfectly. Every detail we remembered lined up exactly. Then my sister's partner said something that gave me full-body chills. She told us that while we were in the bathroom, she had seen a young man in a black shirt get out of that same car and clap while calling for the white dog. According to her, there was never an older man with a white beard. Ever. It was the same car, the same dog, but a completely different person. We all agreed there was only one person involved, not multiple people switching places. Somehow, each of us had seen a different version of the same individual. Then my sister mentioned something else she hadn't said earlier. She told us that when we came out of the bathroom, the van that had been blasting music was already gone, and there was no music playing at all. That confused me even more because I clearly remembered hearing the music as we walked back to the car. In my memory, the sound never stopped until we were seated again. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started looking things up online and found many stories from people describing strange, unexplainable experiences in Southwest Oregon and Northwest California, especially around Cave Junction. Reading those stories only made our experience feel more unsettling. To this day, I don't know what we experienced. I don't know if it was something paranormal, psychological, environmental, or something else entirely. All I know is that it felt real. All of us felt it, and it hasn't left our minds. That rest stop looked ordinary, but whatever happened there didn't feel ordinary at all. And I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of being there.